We got Gary Michael Capetta here. Gary, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing okay. How you doing, Brian? How you doing, Dave?
Hey.
We're doing really good, Gary. I just actually finished reading your book this morning, Body Slam: Memoirs of a Wrestling Pitchman. It's about 21 years of working in the wrestling industry, from being the guy that some of the older fans will remember, very young Gary Michael Capetta being chased around the ring by George the Animal Steele, until actually being the first, probably the first six-figure ring announcer. Maybe the only one in the history of pro wrestling. Would that be correct?
I think, well, definitely definitely as the person who only was doing ring announcing. I think that's true.
Only professional wrestling ring announcing. I mean, obviously Michael Buffer made a great living doing ring announcing for boxing, and he did do wrestling at the same time.
He was not working in the office also. You know,
right.
With the guys, for instance, Howard, I don't know what he does, but he doesn't just ring announce. He works full-time in Titan Towers.
Right.
So as just an announcer, I think you might be right.
Let's see. I would think right now. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I don't know what Penzer does, but well, he's booking worldwide, I guess.
Yeah.
He's putting all the
good job.
He puts all the good matches on TV that nobody ever sees.
Dave was very loyal to WCW in the years before he started announcing. Supplied a lot of job guys when they used job guys. And when it was decided that I wasn't going to continue, they treated him so shabbily. And I actually tried to coach him, tried to help when I saw I wasn't coming back. Dave was, he wanted it so bad, and I understood it, and he kind of had to take what they gave him. And I hope that he's worked out a better deal. They actually brought him in, and they said, look, Gary Capetta's not going to continue, but we don't want you to get the misconception that this is a promotion for you. Right away, the control deal. And then the first pay-per-view after I left, which was June of 1995, Dayton, Ohio, Michael Buffer couldn't be there. And my contract had expired. We had agreed to part terms, and they called me. And they wanted me to continue. And I said, what do you need me to continue for? You have, Dave Penzer and you have Michael Buffer. Well, Michael can't be there. Well, okay, you have to show any kind of faith in Dave Penzer. And I didn't do the show. And Dave did the whole thing. He did a fine job. And, more credit to him. I just thought it was a shabby way to treat him.
I think that one of the strengths of the book, and one of the things I liked about the book is I saw you in this book as sort of the normal guy in the, how about the normal guy in the unnormal world, if that's such a word, of professional wrestling. And it sometimes, you were in it, but then you weren't so in it that you were like in the quicksand aspect of it. And the fact that you were able to walk away from it in itself says something, because, basically most people, that leave professional wrestling are dragged out kicking and screaming.
Yeah,
because it's, once you get the bug, you never want to leave. They used to call it the Hotel California. And you understood. What I almost wish that you had talked more about, especially being in WCW for 1988 through 1995, or most of that period. Not quite, but during that whole period from just before the thing kind of took off or before it took off, and that whole period where Turner owned it, and it was a series of false starts. Is that whole what's the word I'm looking for? Political, and you touched on it, the politics and everything, and then maybe you should, discuss the whole thing of, you're sitting there. One of the things as a fan of wrestling at that time is the thought that, WCW should be killing Vince McMahon because it's, CNN and TBS and Ted Turner and everything, and yet somehow, it never got its act together. And then, we would watch CNN, and they would feature, WWF guys on TV, and they would never have WCW guys on, and the whole thing was, well, we don't want to show favoritism to our own company. And it was like that whole frustration that, here you are owned by a company that actually could be the number one company in wrestling, yet it's like they didn't want to do it, and you were just running around on the road spinning your wheels.
It was
What do you think that was?
The resources that Turner Broadcasting had, that, they just wouldn't allow to WCW. Actually, it's funny you say that, because the working title of the book, I wrote this book back in 95, 96. When I came off the road, I spent 2 years solid. I sat home and I wrote. And the working title was body slams in the boardroom. And I just had so much material. I mean, I have another half of a book that's on my computer that is not part of this Body Slams edition, because I just couldn't fit everything in, and I just thought it would be more entertaining and informative to the fans and also to the non-wrestling fans who want to learn about the business, to just step back a little bit. And part of it reads like a reporter's view. The other part is like fiction of the road stories. And
except they're all true.
Oh, yeah. And it's very hard in wrestling. I mean, you know, it's so much in vogue to say, yeah, we're doing a shoot interview. Very rarely is there a shoot interview on television. Come on, please. But what's in Body Slams?
Except by Shane Douglas.
What's in Body Slams?
And on ECW television. Yeah.
So, I mean, and no one has shot any holes in anything that I report. One thing that's unfortunate, I think, is that it always seems to be more, you know, tantalizing, titillating, fascinating to people to talk about the negative side of things. And I try to, and I believe I've presented a very well-balanced look at my experiences with different people. For instance, Dusty Rhodes in my book, I don't paint him in any negative light, because whatever he did and however he did the NWA in, and however huge his ego may be, it didn't affect me. And this is my perspective. So people may have something to say about, negative to say about the personal side of some of the announcers, but they were always very generous to me, always gave me name plugs, always gave me, Jim Cornette called me the world's most dangerous announcer. Those sound like little things, but they're important. Now let's go to the reigning Gary Michael Capetta. That's important. And the reason I believe politically that they felt comfortable doing that is that I knew what my role was, and I was very happy with it. And I had no aspirations to be a commentator. And the only time I was a commentator was when I did it in the Spanish language. And since Jim Ross and Tony Schiavone and Chris Cruz and, you know, all the other guys weren't capable of doing that, there was no threat to them. So they were always very generous to me, and I always appreciate that.
I totally screwed up in that Legion of Doom Money Incorporated thing, because Legion of Doom lost the title to Money Incorporated in early '92, and the WrestleMania I was talking about was in '93. So that wasn't the reason they won the belts. Okay? So totally screwed up on that. Okay. Yeah, so that's the
Maybe
deal
Hawk
there.
stuck there for a year.
In England. It was August when I think it was DiBiase and I think it was IRS against the Legion of Doom at that SummerSlam at Wembley. I know it was at Wembley because it was because he never came back from Wembley for a long time. Him and John Nord. So let's see. Also, one more thing I just want to make mention, since somebody asked about this one. They were arguing. There's an argument about Jeff Jarrett when he left the WWF to go to WCW with Russo last year. Did he hold Vince McMahon up for additional money to appear on the pay-per-view and do the job for China? He held the Intercontinental title, and yes, he did. If so, do you know what the amount was? I heard it was into the 6 digits. Is that true? I believe the number was somewhere between $175,000 and $200,000. So yes, it's true. And actually, he held up Jim Ross. So he got his little revenge on Jim Ross because he blamed Jim Ross for him going to WCW or something. Anyway, Gary.
Jim's never going to cook for him.
Gary, in the 5 years since you left pro wrestling,
yep.
Back to almost every 5-year period of pro wrestling, there were monumental changes, but probably more in this 5-year period than anyone except for maybe like 83 to 88, the whole business changed, because of the death of the territories and McMahon going national, and Turner ended up getting involved at the end of 88. But this one as well, I mean, it was just the whole atmosphere of the business changed. And looking from the outside as someone who was on the inside for the previous pretty much 20 years, what are your thoughts as far as viewing how wrestling from kind of a distance, but kind of I'm sure you're still friends with a lot of the people in there.
Yep. Here's my fear, Dave. Wrestling is always, as you know, has always been a cyclical business. In 1985, when Hogan and McMahon took wrestling nationally, and Cyndi Lauper and the MTV and NBC Saturday Night, people couldn't see that there would be a downward spiral. Then came the early 90s and Vince's trial, and of course Turner wasn't doing anything to capitalize on Vince's misfortune. They couldn't see how things are like through the roof, and people can't see what's going to happen. And that is when the next fad comes along, and the fickle public, not the hardcore fans, but the fickle public goes in another direction to whatever it is that we can't foresee right now. I'm concerned of what the condition of the business is going to be. How is the business going to be left? I'm not thrilled with a lot of what I've seen, and I know you've heard that over and over again. But I have a business reason for it, because there's only so far that TNA is going to go. There's only so far that the vulgarities are going to go, and the blasphemy and all that kind of garbage. And I think it's great short term if it's going to sell tickets. But what's going to happen in 5 years, 4 years, 6 years when that is around again and it goes into the toilet? What's going to be left? And I think that the one way that wrestling has always remained healthy is when the core product keeps with the art of the game. And I talk about the art of the game in body slams. It's the art of the game is not hitting someone in the head with a staple gun or shoving someone through a table. It's not violence. It's simulated violence. It's magic. It's magical. And when you take the magic away and the wonderment away, you've lost the heart of the art of the game. And unless that's preserved, it's going to be very, very tough to revive the business the next time the cycle goes into the downward spiral.
Now, one of the things you talked about, actually, this was only in passing in your book. You mentioned this, and I remember vaguely the situation when it happened, was when you filed a suit against the WWF, and you actually, did you get a settlement, or did you actually win in court? How did that thing end up?
Oh boy, dangerous waters. But let's go into some dangerous waters.
Okay.
Back in let me just, I have to set it up. Back in 1979 or so, when people were just starting to buy VCRs for their home, and we really couldn't foresee, the Zoom, the fact that everyone's going to have a VCR like they have a telephone in their house or a television in their house. Vince McMahon sent out to a local spot show in northern New Jersey release forms, and in exchange for, it was either a penny or a dollar, but I think it was a penny. All the boys were to sign these forms. Once you signed the forms,
that's fair compensation, a penny.
Once you signed these forms, all of your rights were gone for any kind of merchandising. And of course, I was the little quiet announcer in the corner with the funny velvet bow tie that no one paid attention to. And I just thought, this doesn't sound right, and I don't like it. So I just took the form, put it in my pocket, and I never signed it. But everyone else who was on all of those early Coliseum videotapes signed those rights away. And if they got paid just because Vince wanted to pay them, but not because Vinny had to pay them. And so when those, I didn't know about the Coliseum videotapes. I was busy. I was teaching. I was announcing. I was working in other areas. And actually, were students of mine that came up to me in class and said, Senor, so I teach Spanish, they call me Senor. Senor, we saw you on the videotapes. So what are you talking about? What videotapes? And as it turned out, I was on 11 videotapes, including Hulkamania. They even lifted my voice, and I'm the voice on the audio tape of the Hulkamania workout set from the mid-'80s. So I sued the Titan. I sued WWF. My attorney was, Dave, I know that you're going to say, Gar, I didn't think you were this stupid. But my attorney was a friend of a wrestler, okay? And so we proceeded. He filed the papers, and things were going along nicely. And then all of a sudden, magically, and I still don't know why, my attorney stopped representing me, but didn't tell me. He stopped going to the pretrial hearings. The case, Dave, was...
In a case against Vince McMahon, how does this happen?
The case was dismissed in February of that particular year. In June, I received a letter after several telephone calls to my attorney saying, Gar, everything takes time. Just be patient. Now, mind you, the case had been dismissed. And I have this letter in my hand from my attorney. I didn't find out until the following October when I had other attorneys look into it for me. So I sued my attorney. And because the case against Vince, it didn't even stop there. So I sued my attorney. It was a malpractice suit. In order to win a malpractice suit, you have to prove the underlying case, which I did, which was that Vince McMahon owed me, and that it was a valuable case. We had a witness, which was our star witness, to show the value of videotapes. And a couple weeks before the trial, all of a sudden he remembered that he had an association with the WWF. So he was gone. So it was, make conclusions for yourself. I'm just telling you those are the facts. I did win the settlement against my attorney, who was disbarred in New York as a result.
Wow.
And that's the story. Those are the facts, okay?
Wow,
What happens when you make a deal with the devil?
What was that, Brian?
What happens when you make a deal with the devil?
So there you go. Well,
yeah.
There have been many diabolical deals along the way that I've, been privy to, but, I didn't get into it in Body Slams. I have another half of the book already written that I had to pull out. And if and when Body Slams is picked up by a larger, there'll be Body Slams Plus.
Now, many people, certainly like in the Philadelphia area, New Jersey area, will remember you from the 70s and what was it, All-Star Wrestling? Was it the Hamburg show? I mean, I remember like when the first time I became familiar with the World Wrestling Federation or Worldwide Wrestling Federation. Yep. Was you would be the ring announcer on one of the shows and Joe McHugh on the other.
Right.
And then as time went on, I guess basically, and it's all detailed in the book, you kind of had a split with the World Wrestling Federation, and then you wound up largely through Gary Juster as the voice of WCW until you eventually left in '95. And one of the things, and in fact, this was actually somewhat of you didn't really go into it that much. It's sort of mentioned. I mean, you got your digs in a little bit at as far as that went. I remember one of the controversies that did involve you would have been when, I guess it was Bischoff first brought in Michael Buffer, because the whole thing was that, Gary Capetta was a more than competent ring announcer, and they were bringing in Michael Buffer, who, when he first started ring announcing wrestling, was totally incompetent for wrestling, even though obviously he's a great boxing ring announcer. And even to this day, he comes off as a guy who's, flown in and is reading cards and really, has no idea what he's actually talking about. But he's, he's got that celebrated look, and you can say, let's get ready to rumble, which I make it suit for just saying, maybe.
Uh-oh, Dave, those are dangerous waters there, buddy.
I know. So, but I mean, from your standpoint, did you just take it as, well, this is business, or it's sort of, or like, because I remember watching those main events in that period, and cringing at the ring announcing and going like, God, I mean, they got a ring announcer. I mean, whoever heard of two ring announcers for a show anyway? You know what I mean?
Before I answer your question, you just went through a little bit of a history where I went from WWF to Gary Juster. I think, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, I think that I hold the distinction of being the only individual to ever work for the AWA, the NWA, and the WWF at the same time. Possible? At the same time.
At the same time.
I used to announce.
I wonder, maybe some refs that work New Jersey. Is there a possibility that some of the refs might have done that? I don't know.
Because I was the announcer.
Certainly, no one in
USA at the Meadowlands, at the Continental Airlines Arena. Like, let's say the first weekend of the month, and 2 weekends later, I would be in there for the WWF.
Now that actually to me was pretty fascinating that either side would allow that.
Yeah.
Considering, I mean, that was a heated war. I mean, I remember that.
I know.
And I remember you as a ring announcer, but the idea that you were doing, I remember you did Pro Wrestling USA, but I was actually surprised to read, although I guess I should have been aware of it at the time, that you were doing both groups. I mean, the idea that you would have been doing AWA and Crockett at the same time wasn't unusual at all because they weren't at war, theoretically.
Actually, they were aligned.
Yeah, but WWF was at that point was at war with everyone, and everyone was at war with WWF.
I was amazed. that, that Vinny didn't call and, just can me there. But it was my decision because, you know what, I was always a second banana, always a supporting player, and I was always happy about it. Never sold a ticket, and I don't want anyone ever to think that, because, GMC wrote a book that he's full of himself, because then it's just not the case. But when McMahon didn't call me to fire me, it was like very weird. But I thought that one of the only assets that I had at the time, other than my exposure on television, was people believed me. Like when I was truthful with them, and also when I showed the company's BS to them, they kind of believed me, and to go out every other week and to say this is the greatest show, in wrestling, and I was doing it every other week for different promotions. I just felt myself I had to withdraw from one of those promotions, and the reason I withdrew from the WWF was because Greg Gagne offered me the ESPN slot, so it was a national thing for me. So anyway, to answer your question about the Buffer thing, I outlined in Body Slams how that all came about. They actually called me into the office. Eric Bischoff called me in. I sat in with Gary Juster in his office. Eric came in. Eric says to me, there are going to be a lot of changes. There's going to be a lot of changes here. There are going to be a lot of people that are going to be going out that door. But I want you to know, Gary, you're safe. You're not one of them. Oh, okay, Eric, that's nice. But I also want you to know, for this one show, as a special, we're going to bring Michael Buffer in, and we're going to ask him to do the main event. And I don't want you to be offended. And I said, okay, Eric, whatever you want. Like, you're the boss. And at that point, as I outlined in the book, Juster's phone rings, the inner office kind of thing. He gets up, he leaves, and no sooner than Juster leaves the office, Eric leans over to me and says, and if there's anyone who's got to wash his butt, he didn't use that word, but his butt, it's him. This is one of the guys that works for him, one of the guys that was, I don't know, I thought was being loyal to him at the time. And I'm saying, wow, Eric, you just told me everything I need to know about you. You know what I mean? Well, Eric always had the bad habit of only telling me half the story. Dave, you probably can confirm or put the nix on this, but I'm pretty sure that Michael Buffer is represented by the same guy who's done a lot of representing of Hulk Hogan. Is that
I believe that's right. Yeah, I believe
whatever.
so. Henry Holmes.
Yeah,
Henry Holmes.
So, it's Eric's love for Hollywood, both Hogan and Hollywood the city. Buffer in. Just to ingratiate himself with some power people.
One of the things in the book I wanted to ask you about, it's actually detailed in there, was, I don't know if it's your first meeting with Shane McMahon, but it's certainly a meeting when Shane McMahon was kind of hanging around ringside,
yep.
And I just thought that was like a pretty funny story. Why don't you kind of recount that one?
Sure. It was my one and only meeting with Shane McMahon, and it was when he was a teenager. He was a kid, and Vinny very rarely came out to shows other than TV and Madison Square Garden. But when he started to groom Hogan for the championship and the national takeover, he was coming out more and more to be sure that Hogan was handled properly. And he was at the Meadowlands one night, and he brought along his kid, who very early, as far as when he owned the Cape Cod Coliseum, he had Shane out there picking up garbage, and after concerts and so forth, and teaching him from the ground up. And I didn't know he was Vinny's son. He was just a kid that was sitting at ringside at the table. At the time, it was a commission-run event, and so he was sitting there, and he was getting in the way. Okay, he was just getting in the way. This particular card, there were a lot of guys who were, outside the ring, wrestling all around, dumping the table over, and I would, jump out of the way and sell all the time, and that's 21 years of selling, and this kid was just in the way. And I thought, well, maybe he's the son of one of the commissioners, so I better be careful. And so we're sitting there, and all of a sudden he starts asking me questions, and his questions started getting more and more detailed and more business-like. And I'm thinking, wow, like this kid must have been like 16 years old. And all of a sudden he offered to me, he said, you know who I am? And I said, Shane, I'm Vince McMahon's son. Oh, I said, well, now my wheels start turning, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is pretty cool. I have to, ask this kid some kind of question so I can get inside of his brain a little bit. And I said to him, I'm sure that wrestling's talked about a lot around your kitchen table. And, you hear your dad talk about, and your granddad. What would be the one thing that you've learned about pro wrestling that you think would be the most important thing? And the kid, without skipping a beat, turned to me and shot out. He said, to he said the most important thing is to not let your talent know, not let the wrestlers know that they're important to you, so you can get away with paying them the least amount of money as possible. Like, whoa, this is a 16-year-old kid, and it was that was my one run-in with Shane, and I was. Luckily, I was able to continue the card because I was speechless outside the ring. It was a very telling thing. You know, I've spoken to people who are contemporaries of Shane today. I understand he's a really nice guy, but at that particular point, I think that speaks volumes. You know, people need to remember the McMahons. Wrestling's in their blood. They're like circus people. You know, they're consummate business people, and they know exactly what they're doing. And Vince is. For as much as I knock him in the book personally, because he's just not the kind of guy I'd go bowling with on a Friday night, Dave, okay? But, you know, you have to have respect for him business-wise. I don't like the way he treats people. I think you can be a very successful businessman, and you can still be decent, and you can recognize a person's loyalty. And I think the shortcoming that he has, and people may say no, is that he's a very insecure guy. And he has to overcompensate for his insecurity in the bravado, you know, and the way he used to strut around the old arenas, TV, in his terry cloth slippers, and you know, it was just amazing. You know, he was daddy's boy, and he wasn't going anywhere, and he was only 29 at the time when I started working with him, and he was a commentator, and he sat 10 feet away from me every third Tuesday when I did the ring announcing. And anytime, not by my doing, but anytime I got involved in the action, when like George Steele attacked me or Superfly Snook attacked me, man, he hated that. He hated that so much. But you know, that's you know, just the way he is. But he's a very insecure guy.
Let's go to Adam in Brooklyn. Adam, you're first up with Gary.
Oh, hey guys, how you doing?
We're doing really good.
First of all, I have to say I think Gary Michael Capetta is one of the best ring announcers of at least my time. And he's one of the people I really remember from when I was a kid watching WCW. And first of all, I have a question a little bit off topic. I was wondering if the deal with WWF and WCW goes through, who do you think the first person that WWF would let go, as far as wrestlers go, would be from WCW?
If that question was for me, Dave, I didn't hear it.
If WWF, if Vince McMahon buys WCW, who would be the first guy he would let go?
Let go, like to the other side, or just let go?
No, just fire.
Like fire?
Yeah, fire.
Maybe Luger. Maybe.
How about the other two guys?
I don't have a clue. I'm not current with the talent situation right now.
Well, personally, I think they get rid of Sean Stasiak.
Russo.
Well, he said wrestler. I would have said Russo too, except he said wrestler.
But you think they would get rid of Stasiak if WWF came in because of the shenanigans backstage?
It's possible. Maybe even likely. You know, they haven't even evaluated the talent, so it's really hard. We're all like, you know, who knows what Vince McMahon thinks? Who knows what Shane McMahon, Jim Ross think? I mean, I'm just like surmising just because of the way Luger left and the fact that he's not that valuable in wrestling anymore. You know, leads to me to believe that maybe, you know, that would be Vince McMahon's revenge, is to get rid of him. Whereas Stasiak, you know, he got fired, but, you know, I mean, he's not a big deal one way or the other. I mean, like, they could fire him and nobody would notice. They could keep him and nobody would notice. If he's on the other, you know, he had heat with so many of the guys in WWF, but in WCW he doesn't have that heat with the guys, so I don't know that they would necessarily. I mean, they may very well. I don't know.
You know, Dave, as I'm thinking about it, I think the best business move would be to get rid of his public relations time bombs that are walking around there. Someone like a Scotty Steiner.
That's the one. I wonder what he would do. That's a real interesting one.
Was there ever an incident when Scott Steiner left the WWF between him and Vince?
I don't recall. I don't know. Was there? What?
Someone told me there was.
There may have been. I don't recall. You know, Scott Steiner's got a hot head. I remember the Steiners being suspended, but it was actually Rick who was suspended, and Scott was suspended because Rick was suspended. And that was over. I think that was over a steroid test, actually.
My guess is that Vince would. I mean, if he saw the potential to make money with somebody, he would put the personal problems aside, and he would just think business. And since he has Viacom to please, and he certainly doesn't need any black mark on his public record, is that the smart thing to do to get rid of all the time bombs that are ticking there.
You know who I could see him getting rid of is Sid Vicious.
Mm-hmm. I think Sid Vicious is already gone.
Well, he's still under contract because he was just doing PR work for them just recently. They just never use him. Yeah, they just don't use him.
They could probably release him very easily then because,
It's been over 90 days since he wrestled, so... Yeah, same reason they got rid of Bret Hart. So, yeah. I mean, they could, without a doubt. I mean, they could do it, so...
And I have a question for Gary. I was wondering what it's like to work for Bill Watts, and what were your thoughts on him?
I heard the first part. What was it like to work?
Did you? I don't know. Gary ever worked? Gary, did you ever work for Bill Watts?
Oh yeah. Oh, Kip Fry left WCW.
That's. Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking Mid South Wrestling. Of course, for that 1 year period. Of course you did. That's
yeah. Right. Bill Watts and I got along really well. And the reason for it is that he liked my work first off, and when like other guys, when Kip Fry took over for those, what was it, Dave, 3-4 months?
Yeah, 4 months.
Yep. I made an appointment with Kip Fry, went to his office, and I said, Kip, my contract's up. We need to start talking here. And we had agreed on the 6-figure deal. But before he left, it was never signed. And I was in the office one day. It was in June, so it was like a few months later, and I was essentially working without a contract. I was working on the old money deal. And I said to Bill, Bill, we really need to sit down and consummate this deal. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, well, I'm working without a contract. He said, you're kidding. I said, no. He said, well, come on into my office. I said, all right. And of course, Dave, I had the contract in my back pocket. The working contract, that we were working on. And obviously, I had a lot more important things to do, in those months. But he didn't realize that. So I sat across the desk from him, and he takes out his little granny glasses, and he puts them on, and he's taking a look at the contract.
And he sees the number.
What's that?
He sees the number.
No, but Dave, let me tell you. He said to me, well, okay, what's the problem? I said, well, there are certain. I said, the money is right. That's not the problem. But there's certain clauses in here that just aren't correct. He said, well, tell me what they are. So I start telling him, and he's having difficulty finding it. I get up, walk around the back of his desk, and I lean over him. He's in his huge executive chair, and I lean over him. I said, look, this is wrong. This is supposed to. And everything I said was, honestly, it was true. But it was all to my favor. But I'll tell you what, Dave, everything that I told him, he initialed. He changed it, and he initialed it. Changed it, initialed it, sent it to Turner Legal, and it was passed through. So, how can I complain about the guy? There was also an incident. Do you remember when Jake the Snake came into WCW? We were doing a TV in Baltimore, and it was the night that Sting was supposed to challenge Vader for the title, and the deal was that Jake came in early in the night. He attacked Sting. Sting couldn't challenge Vader for the title, so they had the lottery drawing. And I was told, okay, Gary, we're going to go to the ring, but we have to announce to people they're not going to see the main event. And Bill Watts is standing there, and he said, okay, he said, I'll go out, I'll make the announcement. And I'm thinking to myself, now he's going to become an on-air representative of WCW. The last thing he wants is heat with the fans. So I said, I clued him in on this. I said, Bill, if I may, can I say something? And he said, sure. And I always would ask that question, Dave. I would never just throw my 2 cents in, because I knew how to play the game. And he said, sure, what? I said, you go out there and you start your reign as, as he had just taken over a few months before. You start your reign as the on-air authority of WCW, and people start booing you. No one's going to believe you or listen to you again. I said, why don't you let me go out and take the heat? And, he liked that, and that's what I did. And ultimately, they just told me, okay, Gary, we're going to put all the guys' names in the bag, and they legitimately had all the guys' names in the bag. And they said to me, no matter whose name comes out,
it's Ron Simmons.
It's going to be Ron Simmons. And if you watch that tape closely, and it was, the way they did things, it was like this crumpled up brown bag that they used. Vince would have had this sparkling box, that was lit, and
he'd had those balls like they have like at in some game show or something.
Exactly.
Yeah, like the Royal Rumble drawing thing, sure.
And if you watch that tape closely, he had said to me, as soon as you pull the name, you announce Ron Simmons. I don't care what it says, and you put that name right back in that bag. And I just looked at him. I said, okay. And he could tell by the way I said, "Oh, okay," but I didn't understand what he was talking about. And he said to me, "Because if you put that in your pocket, or if you carry that out of the ring, and you drop it, and someone picks it up, then people will know that this is fake."
It's fake.
If you watch that tape, Dave, as I was in the middle of my announcement, and I still had whosever name it was in my hand. He looks at me, and his head goes up and down like, "Put it back in the bag." And it was, and so of course I did, and that's the night that Ron Simmons won the title.
Anything else, Adam?
Pardon me?
Yeah, I just want to say, I know Bill Watts gets a lot of flack for, a lot of the things he did while he was there. But actually, looking back, I was very young when it was on, but watching my tapes and everything, I thought Bill Watts had a very entertaining product as far as, work rate goes. I don't know about you guys. What do you think?
Well, he demanded everyone work hard. I mean, the problem with Bill Watts, the numbers were not that good under Bill Watts, and then the other aspect was that he couldn't relate to the wrestlers at all. It was one of those things where it was like an older coach who'd been out of the game for many, many years and then came back, and he wanted to and all these guys were veterans and they had learned under Bill Watts was totally different than everyone else who was running a wrestling company, and then he came back trying to implement his things, and the guys couldn't handle it, and there's a lot of things that he wanted to take wrestling back to the past, like the banning the top rope move and banning moves off the top rope, and some of that stuff that just didn't fly with the fans. And
he pulled up the mats too, didn't he?
He pulled the mats off of the floor. Yeah. He didn't want any mats on the floor because he wanted, when guys fell out of the ring, he wanted people to know that they were really going to get hurt on that concrete floor.
Dave, he didn't. Story with the dynamic dudes and Shane Douglas when they went out to they were involved in a match, and Shane was supposed to juice, and then they were supposed to go out and do an interview afterwards. Remember that?
I don't think I remember the story. I mean
okay,
years ago.
Shane was supposed to go out. He's supposed to juice. He comes back, and they're ready to send him out for an interview, and Bill Watts looks at him, and he's just not bleeding enough for Bill Watts. And Bill Watts hauls off, and he whacks him.
I can believe that.
Right in the forehead. And he looks at him and he says, "Okay, that's pretty good. Go on and do your interview."
Yeah,
very, hardcore. But personally, I didn't have any problem with him. He didn't whack me in the head.
One of the things when you were talking about your court case,
mm-hmm.
You're aware of in Vince McMahon when he was on trial,
right,
that as it turned out, the star witness in the trial against Vince McMahon was Emily Feinberg, who was Vince McMahon's longtime secretary.
Mm-hmm.
And before the trial, she was approached by someone to be her agent to represent her for a movie on Vince McMahon or, potential book deals, things like that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
As it turns out, the guy who was negotiating to be her agent happened to be the secret. Nobody knew this. I mean, it was kept secret from they had a secret wedding.
Yeah.
Was the husband
yes.
of the defense attorney for Vince McMahon,
right?
Laura Bravetti's husband, yeah, and whose brother, by the way, was in the movie The Insider. What's the guy's name? Ron Bergman, I think is not Ron. What's Bergman in The Insider? Al, do you know who that is? But anyway, the guy in The Insider, it's actually his brother was the one who would have been married to Laura Bravetti and was involved in that case. It's a fascinating story. And when you're talking about how all of a sudden this person had an involvement with the WWF, it was just amazing how those things happened.
Yeah, I had gotten a call from the chief investigator during that time, and I called my attorney, because I really was unfamiliar with the workings of federal prosecution. And, I answered all of his questions truthfully and to the point. And he just wasn't very, for all of the investigating that they did, he just didn't know which questions to ask. And I'll leave it there.
Yeah. Okay, you can leave it there.
Yeah, because, Dave, come on. I answered all of his questions, and there were other, I was in the WWF during the Sohorian years, and I watched the boys line up for the dispensing of drugs and the scripts. And even I was very naive for a long, long time. And even as a naive guy in my 20s, I knew that prescription drugs, like when a doctor prescribes a drug, it's on file. I mean, there's a database of it. And I'm watching, this guy from Maine and the other guy from Texas, and they're all lined up. And they're going to go home, and they're going to get these things filled all over the country. Well, yeah, it wasn't too bright on the part of Zahorian, and it was all because he wanted to be one of the boys.
No, he was one of the people. They had doctors in every city, or there are doctors in every city that want to be friends with the boys. I mean, Zahorian was just. I mean, the thing with Zahorian is that he was so. His name became so well known in wrestling. Where some of the other ones, just a few guys know and they'll clue in a few of their other friends, but it wasn't like a name where, I wasn't like in the 80s. I wasn't that inside, certainly in the period this was going on. Mm-hmm. But I knew George Zahorian was the steroid supplier for a lot of the WF wrestlers. I mean, even before Vince went national. I just knew the name was out to people on the inside, and eventually, when eventually the laws changed, because at the time before 1988, technically, what he was doing was not. I guess it's debatable if it was legal or not. There's different ways of looking at it, and during the trial, they were looking at it in various different ways. But after 1988, it absolutely clearly was illegal what he was doing, and he continued to do it for a little while afterwards, and that's what he got busted for.
Well, let's put it this way: he would arrive at the arena with a box, and in the box there were little bags. Now, he had not examined anybody. You know what I mean? It's not as if he examined somebody and there was a situation that they needed corrected, medically.
All these guys were
is low.
all these guys were suffering from all the guys were suffering from anemia. What was actually what's the word I'm looking for? It was really funny and sad. It was in the closing remarks by Sean O'Shea in the McMahon trial, and he was just, he actually did a tremendous closing, even though he came nowhere near getting any convictions. But that's another story. That trial's a story in itself. But in his closing states company, they all have an illness. They all need medicine, and they never get better.
Yeah, and the dead giveaway that everyone remember the long white coat he used to wear as a doctor. It was like,
at the matches.
Yeah. He's just drawing attention to himself. He's one of them.
Well, I remember, he did angles.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that was the other one I always thought, and this was from a wrestling standpoint, and he was not the only one who did this. I always thought that it was really scary whenever, because if you look back at WWF tapes, okay, and the doctors that did angles, ultimately in almost every case, should not have called attention to themselves, because they all end up in trouble except for one, and without mentioning who the one was that didn't, he ended up being banned from the dressing room too, because they were afraid he was going to end up in trouble, but he never did. Yeah. So,
and I have to say though that on a human side, I think it's just really sad, like forever.
Yeah.
And he was sucked in, but it wouldn't have happened unless he was encouraged, and his life really life.
He spent years ago. The thing that was sad was I think that Zahorian thought all these guys were his friends, and then the minute there was heat, they disassociated him from, themselves from him. Hogan was just like, I never saw the guy, I don't know where this picture came from, and it's like, this picture, the big picture that was in all the papers of Vince, Zahorian, and Hogan, and it's just like, we get pictures taken all the time. The only reason I'm involved in this is because, I once took a picture with this guy, and it's like, wait a minute, you know what I mean? Especially when everything came out later that, he was sending Hogan drugs, through the mail.
That's right.
To Hogan's house, to Hogan's friend's house, to Vince McMahon's office, to give to Hulk Hogan,
That's right. I wonder how some of these guys can sleep at night. That's all I have to say. It's just a very sad human commentary.
But that is a lot of the nature of not all pro wrestlers, but so deep into it where the whole thing is con, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them, they don't separate the fantasy part from the reality. And you documented, the stuff with Abdullah and everything like that. Just little things. Here's this guy with all this money, and he's, trying to, con people to save on like a hotel room or something.
It was amazing. He honestly don't know what he did that night when he had me driving around half the night. But it was just funny, the scene when Flair comes into what was it, Ruby Tuesdays or whatever it was, and Abby just leaves him with the drink bill. He was just very, very Abby, you know. And he used to come in directly from Japan, and he'd have these huge wads, like, you know, 10 grand. And I don't blame him for not wanting to leave into the dressing room. And he used to, you know, roll it up in the old school sock, you know, and give it to me. And because he knew I was in the middle of the ring, I wasn't going to run anywhere. And this big bulge in my tuxedo pants. And what people didn't know was that, like, there were $10,000, $15,000 here that he was just bringing back from Japan. It was amazing. And it made me very nervous. After a while, I just said to him, Abby, you find someplace else to put your money while you're working, because I can't risk this.
Yeah.
So.
Let's go to Alan. Alan, what's going on?
Hey, how's it going?
Money.
Hey,
Wait, Brian, go ahead real quick.
I'm just saying, imagine losing Abdul the Butcher's money.
You're going to get a fork in your forehead.
Okay, go ahead, Alan.
Hey, how's it going?
It's going good.
Going pretty good.
Great. Gary, the book was very interesting, and I want to ask you about some of the stories that might not have been in the book, any of the locker room fights that didn't make it into the book, besides the Anderson-Vicious fight. Anything transpire interesting?
To tell you the truth, I was never exposed to real deal fights in the dressing rooms.
Right.
I really don't know that. I mean, to my knowledge, that's not a common occurrence.
Right.
You know about some of the bar fights.
Right.
But no, you know the guys are very careful around each other and with each other. They never. Obviously, you're going to be working in the ring with somebody.
Right.
You don't want to be on the outs with them.
Right, but was there intense heat with Dusty Rhodes and Ric Flair at one time? That's what I've heard for years.
Yeah, I mean, it was yeah, of course. I mean, Dusty really did Flair in, so many times.
Right.
And Flair was always very, rightfully resentful of it. But most of these wars were wars of words and not of fists.
Right. You ever see any matches deviate from the script?
Only the night that Andre the Giant fell asleep in the ring.
You never seen anybody really pull a shoot or anything in 20 years?
Gary, was that with John Studd?
That was with the Iron Sheik.
Oh, okay.
It was in New Jersey, North Jersey, spot show.
Yeah. I think he did once with John Studd too. This was later. This was actually maybe even after you had left. Mm-hmm. I just remember the story of he was in the ring and he held Studd in a headlock, or Studd held him in a headlock, and all of a sudden he hears him snoring. And it's just like, I mean, Studd is like, the thing about this, Studd was like a bad enough worker as it is, okay? I mean, and Andre, I mean, if, let's face it, even if you were a good worker and Andre's asleep, what can you do?
Yeah, right.
I mean, could you imagine? I mean, like, if he must have panicked and just, yeah, it's like, so he just kind of gets, maybe, I don't know.
I guess I would have put a sleeper on him.
Yeah.
No, but you've never seen a fight, break out in the ring, because I know it's happened before a couple of times. But
yeah, no, I've never, I've never seen that.
Right. And also want to ask you, what is your opinion of Hulk Hogan as a person? I mean, you were around him. What do you?
Right. Well, Hulk Hogan face-to-face is very different from Hulk Hogan when you remove yourself from being with him, and what a master politician this guy is.
Yeah.
He's kind of a very
two-faced person, isn't he?
Pardon me?
Two-faced person, right?
He was always very nice to me.
Okay.
At the time when Michael Buffer had come in, and before I realized that Henry represented both of them, I had made the mistake of talking to Hulk about the situation, and it was probably, a really bad thing for me to do. But I didn't know it, and, to my face, he would, he's talking to me about, well, I'll talk to Eric and whatever. But, now in hindsight, I can see that I was just, just probably releasing myself from WCW a little bit earlier.
Right.
He's, why can't he just hang up the boots,
He's being
selfish. It's what we talked about. I mean, it's so hard to walk away.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, if Hulk Hogan walks away from wrestling, the whole world is gone. When he's off TV for good,
right.
The whole world, because the only reason he can make it as an wrestler, as Hulk Hogan, the former wrestler, he's what's the guy, Fabian or something, one of those guys that sort of was once a celebrity, but nobody today even knows why.
How many? If all of your listeners were just to imagine that they would be in their 40s and never have to work another day in their life, and they can live in luxury and have their investments. Like, who would not want that? It just shows you the mania, the craziness of the psyche of some of these guys. And most of the guys, it's just very difficult to walk away. I think it's really sad for the guys that can't walk away because they can't afford it. Guys that have made tons of money in the business and wind up poor and on the welfare rolls when they're through. That's really sad.
I mean, and we got to run to a break. But I mean, look at let's face it, Dusty Rhodes is still wrestling. Ric Flair is still wrestling.
Yep.
We have like a bunch of emails all asking the same question. And that is, who was the guy whose name was on the list that you picked out when Ron Simmons won the title?
You know what? I don't remember.
The gambler.
I honestly don't remember. I'm sorry that I don't. But I'm just being totally honest with you. When I was reading about the various European tours that you talked about, there was an incident, and you never talked about this one. It's not the Arn Anderson Seditious incident, which you did talk about, and I don't even know if you were there or remember it, but I seem to remember that there was a fight with because you wrote a lot about PN News and Curtis Hughes, and I guess they're snoring and things like that. But there was a fight, I think, with PN News and Rick Rude at one point on one of the tours. Were you around then, or? I was probably on the tour, but I wasn't present for it.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm privy to it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I had just kind of heard that.
Actually, PN and Curtis, they could have had a fight with anyone at any second. The guys were ready to rip their throats out.
Yeah.
They were just anti-social human beings. Now, Curtis Hughes is a real interesting case. He and I were sitting at the boarding gate waiting to go over on one of these European tours, and his disenchantment and his anti-social tendencies stem back from his football days. When he was he went in for a tryout with the Kansas City Chiefs, I believe it was. And just like when I was breaking into wrestling, announcing, I was so naive. He was very naive, too, and he couldn't believe that the veterans were trying to hurt him, that were trying to take him out. And, he was just very disgruntled from his experience there, and I think that's never left him. I mean, he's carried it with him. He trusts no one and doesn't like too many people, and that's really driven him to really mess up a lot of his life.
He got some chances because he was such a big, agile guy. Mm-hmm. But, when he first started, I remember for a big guy, that guy used to come off the ropes really fast. And, remember he got the bodyguard role and things like that. But he blew every one of those chances.
Yeah. Yeah, he did. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy on his case. But it was almost from those early experiences, he just has put blocks in, as you said, every opportunity that he's had to shine.
Let's go to James in Seattle. James, what's going on?
Hey, guys. How's it going?
It's going good.
Good. Hey, Dave, I just wanted to thank you, first of all, for correcting my mail situation.
Oh, you're welcome.
And
I can't stand the post office, but I think by saying that was probably a stupid thing for me to say because it's so frustrating with the post office. That's all I can say. It shouldn't be that hard. It shouldn't be that hard to mail things and then have them arrive in 3 or 4 days. You would think, without being burned or having holes in them or just not arriving. Yeah.
Going to the wrong address, coming back.
Coming back even. Yeah.
Actually, I got a couple figure fours from a friend of mine, and his were actually burned as well. So it must be something with the post offices up here.
Yeah, I've never heard that anywhere else.
I just want to know how things get burned.
It was just a hot issue. That's all.
I
don't know. Anyways, just a little comment about the interview on your website today.
Buff?
Yeah. Is he an extreme case of believing his own hype or what?
More than most, yeah.
An outspoken case.
To say that he's definitely underpaid.
Well, look. Okay, he hangs around with Sting, who makes way more than he does, with Luger, who makes more than he does. So he's figuring I'm running around the country and I'm underpaid, understanding that they're for whatever reason, or Scott Steiner,
right.
Rick Steiner, they all made more money than him. Norton made more money than him, which was another case. He's thinking I'm underpaid, so that's what he thinks.
But has he ever, in his, drawn any money himself?
You can't tell him that. because they were all on all those cards in '98, and those cards. Remember, they had that one period where they sold out like 23 straight nights,
right.
And he was. I don't even think he worked any of those shows though. He probably just showed up and did interviews on TV because that guy used to not do house shows all the time.
Yeah, didn't he have one of those deals where it was 5 nights a month or something?
That I don't know, but God, I remember that guy used to get away with no showing more than anyone. I mean, and not so much. This was one of the things about WCW that's so wonderful about that company is that he no showed ticket on sale dates and public appearances and things like that over and over again. It was just one of those things, and no one ever got in trouble for doing a discipline to anyone. So after doing that for a while, what happens is that they never ask him to do it. So that way. The game is well, if you don't go a couple of times, they'll start out guys like Rey Mysterio Jr. who won't say no and will show up. You know what I mean? So those guys end up doing all this that kind of stuff. Or Ric Flair, who, granted is the best guy to send on some of those first days, or at least used to be, just because he could go to do the talk shows and he was so good at it. But it's like the guys who didn't want to do it, they just made it, their punishment was not having to do it, which is exactly what they didn't want to do in the first place. So, it's I don't know. It's like the guys who never do jobs, or who refuse to do jobs, their reward is, instead of being forced to do jobs, their reward is no one ever asks them to do jobs anymore because, no one, I don't know.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
Kind of like the Scott Steiner thing where, he gets physical with the road agents and gets sent home with pay.
Yeah, and then he comes back with a bigger... For a holiday, and then he comes back with a bigger push than ever.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was it. Thanks for getting that mail thing situated. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
And I'll keep listening and reading.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay, let's go to Adon in Toronto.
Hey, Dave. How's it going?
It's going very good.
I have a question for you. Have any wrestlers ever been really rude to you until they realized who you were?
Me?
Yeah.
They usually get rude after they realize who they are.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably more the other way, yeah. I can't really recall someone doing an about face. I mean, I sort of, there was one period, that pops into my head. It was Manabu Nakanishi, and he wasn't rude. He was actually very nice, okay? And then someone said, this is Dave, you were just talking when they were with a bunch of people, and then someone said, this is Dave Meltzer. And then all of a sudden he went to this gushing, and the other people were just laughing because one of the people who was there was actually familiar with working in Hollywood. And so he starts doing this gushing thing, and they just go, my God, this was right back in Hollywood when someone finds out you're a producer.
Yeah.
But, no, I remember the funniest one was the first when I was in Mexico hanging around with Jushin Liger, and they said who I was, and Jushin Liger how would I say, he holds his fingers up like it's a cross, and he would be warding off a vampire, and he goes no, like that.
Yeah.
So.
Also, would you guys ever have X-Pac on the show?
It's one of those things with the World Wrestling Federation. If that thing's clear, I'd have him on for sure, Yeah. I'd have, any of those guys, that they clear to do it. But right now, they think that it's competition for their website, so they're not allowing people on right now.
Right.
Maybe that will change. What?
If he were to come on, would you ask him if he was on the booking committee?
Well, of course I'd ask him, what his influence was, of course.
Yeah. You can get at why he never does jobs and stuff.
Well, we would joke about him being so smart. Of course we would.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I was just wondering, and I just wanted to thank you for the show, because some classes of mine at school are so boring, so I just go onto the computer, stick in my headphones, and listen to the archive show from the night before.
Okay. I'm not sure that I like encouraging you to do poorly in school, but I do take that as a compliment. Thank you very much.
Hey, Dave. Dave.
Yeah.
I'm thinking he's asking how people in the business treat you.
Mm-hmm.
Probably over the last 19 years, you have made the slowest turn from heel to babyface. But then, because
you think so? Because I think they still. Well, it's less now than before. There was a period there. Okay, there was a period there where everyone hated me. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Then there was this period where they all hated me, but nobody knew. But it was like they were all the new crop of wrestlers who like were taught to hate me, but they didn't know why they were taught to hate me because nobody actually explained it to them.
Mm-hmm.
So they hated me, but nobody knew why, and it was like they were hating me for exposing the business, except for the fact that Vince McMahon and everybody else was freely admitting what the business already was by this point in time. So
I'll tell you,
then I think that where it's at right now is it just depends on like the last the old last match theory. It's like if their last match was a good match, they like me. If their last match was a bad match, they blame it on me, type of thing.
They hated you. Now they want to get on your show, but I'll tell you from the beginning to the end, they always envied you. And that's
really
a fact.
Did you ever really get any death threats from wrestlers?
I wouldn't. I would say the answer is yes, but I don't think that they were serious because nobody like ever pulled a gun on me.
Right.
But I would say in like 20 years, probably like 2 or 3, maybe. Yeah, it wasn't that. It's people thought I was never in a position where like I thought anyone was ever going to like attack me or anything like that.
So it never made you reconsider what you were doing?
Oh no. I mean there was one night where the AWA came to town and a couple of the AWA guys. I mean it was like this actually they were coming to San Francisco from Denver, and in Denver they pretty much all vaguely knew what I looked like. This is going back. This is in the mid '80s. So this was before I'd ever probably been on television, but they vaguely knew. And a couple of the guys were like, when we were going to beat him up. I mean, that's the goal, And I had been warned by a couple of other guys, and I was like, this is for real. Everybody got drunk last night, and they're going to do it. So, I ended up in a situation where I ended up bumping into him anyway, but what happened was, I guess, is one of the other wrestlers, they asked, like, is that him? And then they go, no, that's not him. And that was it. So, I guess they kind of saved my life. I mean, and my whole thing was like, no matter what you do, avoid these guys. And then I ended up bumping into him anyway when I'm trying to avoid them.
And one more question.
Yeah.
If you ever had a really good feeling that the price was going to go up, would you ever buy WWF stock?
No, I feel that I can't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because of it's sort of like a conflict of interest. I mean, I had feelings many times that the price would go up, and as it turned out,
It went down.
it always went down. Every time I saw that there's going to be this artificial rise in the business, so the stock's going to go up, but then the price always went down anyway. But no, I would never buy stock in WWF just because it's sort of a conflict of interest. And there are times where when it got down to like 12 or something, I was sort of like, this is a pretty good buy because it can't get any, it's worth so much more than it's going for right now.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks a lot, and keep making shows, and I'll keep listening.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Dave, one time I was verbally assaulted because of you. Do you realize that?
They found a newsletter on you or something?
No, it was from a fan. I was in a convenience store looking for ice cream, looking for my butter pecan ice cream, and this guy, it was right when WCW started the Disney tapings, and this guy used to read your newsletter, and he used to read what was going to happen for the next 3 months. And he came up to me and he said, how dare you expose the business like this? You're taping so far in advance, and I can read all about it in Meltzer. And I just said, well, I had nothing to do with it. All I do is do the announcing, And he wouldn't go away. And finally I just said, well, if you don't want to know what's going to happen, skip that part of the newsletter. Don't read it. So you've caused me a few headaches, too.
Now, what were your thoughts? Doing in that period, because that was a pretty radical departure. Now, even in the WWF or WWF, if you went to the tapings, you sort of knew certain things that would happen ahead of time because they taped 3-4 weeks ahead, going way back. But when WCW's taped that many months ahead, and they would foreshadow all those title changes, that was a big step in wrestling. I don't know if it was a good step or a bad step. Mm-hmm. The tapings were. I mean, maybe short term they were a success, but ultimately they stopped doing them and everything. And in today's wrestling you couldn't do it because you can't book more than a week out because everybody, nobody can keep their story straight. Right. But what were your thoughts, being part of it and, announcing these title changes, growing up in wrestling, where that type of stuff just was never done before? Well,
by that time, so much had changed and it had changed gradually over the time. I mean, once Vince came out and started to talk the way he was talking, in order to save on taxes in New Jersey, before the New Jersey Congress, and saying, oh, no, this is a show, and it was a gradual thing. And the difficult thing for me was to keep track of who was the champion. When I was introducing guys, I had no clue who the tag team champions were at the time or who the world champion was, because maybe the straps, would have been dropped out of pay-per-view that aired 2 months before what we were taping. So to keep all that straight was, the thing of being a cheerleader, because the people that would come in, we were part of the tour. We were part of the Disney MGM tour. And people would come in, they know nothing about wrestling, and we cheerleaders and tell them when to cheer and when to boo. And obviously, I believe that came across as being pretty transparently fake, as far as the reaction goes.
Yeah, because it was commotion on those shows.
Oh yeah, we had a warm-up guy. We had a comedian come in, and he would stand behind me out of the camera range, and he would tell the people when to cheer and when to boo, and he would hold signs up for them to chant certain things. It was, it was just cheesy,
What's funny is Brian will relate to this. The young wrestlers who were cutting their teeth at those tapings, the veterans used to just get so, I don't know, not mad wasn't really the word, but just going like, this is so bad because these guys are out here thinking that they know what to do to get a crowd reaction, not realizing that there's these cheer and boo and chant signs, and then they would go on the road and they would be absolutely clueless as to what to do.
That's right. Yep. They had no experience in working a crowd.
Yeah.
Imagine trying those tapings nowadays with the injury rate.
What?
Imagine trying those tapings nowadays with all the injuries.
Yeah, with the injury rate, that's what I said. With the injuries and just the fact that booking changes on a weekly basis, you couldn't do it. But in those days, they taped several months ahead, and there were embarrassing moments where guys would have left the company for various reasons or occasionally injuries, and that's that made those tapings kind of messed up. But today, yeah, it couldn't be done now. We have I'm trying to think who it was that has this. This is from Andrew in New Jersey, who says, "Who in the business have you remained the closest to since you left?"
Who in the business have I remained closest to? There are a couple guys that I have met along the way. I'm still friends with the very first guy I ever introduced in the ring in July of '74. It was his very first match. Our career started at the same moment, and that's Pretty Boy Larry Sharp of the Monster Factory. Mm-hmm. But Ace Darlin, who's a great independent wrestler, has been a buddy of mine for over 10 years, and through him I've met Crowbar, and he's a good buddy too. Then Jim Kettner down in Delaware, touch base with him once in a while, and some guys that are out of the business now, that promoters. Dave Penzer calls me once in a while, but mostly guys that are no longer in the business, either promoters or photographers, for instance, different guys, but nobody currently that's on top.
Was there ever a guy, just going back, that you thought that you saw, like especially when you were on the road with WCW full time, a guy who should have got a break and for whatever reasons politically never got that break?
Steve Austin.
No, that's an easy one, isn't it?
Right, that's an easy one. Gotcha there, Dave.
Okay, Gary, we are totally out of time. Gary, I want to thank you very much. And again, it's Body Slams, Memoirs of a Wrestling Pitchman. You can get it at bodyslams.com. And thanks for Brian, thanks Al, and we will be back tomorrow at 6, and we'll have Zach Arnold as our guest tomorrow.